Hi, welcome to the Abort Ignorance Montana Podcast. My name is Tanaia, your host, and on this podcast, we seek to educate, advocate, and heal the culture in Montana surrounding abortion. On today's episode, we get to hear from Brinn Higinbotham with Sacred Portion Children's Outreach, and we're going to be talking about adoption and adoption in Montana. We're really excited for this conversation today, and so as always, before we get started, we want you to hit that like button or subscribe so that you can get notified of any new episodes coming out, and make sure you download the episodes so that you can hear them anywhere on the go. And if you have questions after today's episode or an adoption story you want to share or anything to be part of the conversation, we want to hear from you as well. So email us at abortignorancemt@gmail.com to be part of the conversation. Without further ado, we're going to get started. Hi, Brinn. Welcome on.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, we're so excited to have you. So I'm just going to read your bio real quick just to share a little bit about you with our listeners, and then we're just going to dive right in.
Good.
Awesome. So Brinn and her path into social work was shaped by a deep desire to connect with others, provide support, and make a lasting impact in the lives of children and families. Her early experiences included work in applied behavior analysis, where she supported children with developmental needs, as well as experienced walking alongside individuals who had experienced trauma from interpersonal violence. These formative roles gave her a strong foundation in empathy, communication, and trauma-informed care. Over time, she felt called to use what she had learned in a different way, one that more fully aligned with her faith and passion for serving others. And my guess is that's what led you to Sacred Portion.
Absolutely. I was really called to the ministry there and working with families and have loved it ever since.
That's amazing. How long have you been with them?
Just over a year now.
Okay, cool. And so it was more social work before then?
It was more counseling and trauma, and then the behavioral analysis was in an autism clinic, so kind of working with children with those disabilities and working through their needs. And now working more with families and social work, more oriented things. So, yeah.
That's amazing. It takes very special people to work with special needs kids, and we need it. And they're so sweet. I mean, I know that there's hardships with that, but I hear that they're really kind individuals. So
Yeah, definitely. It was a great experience, but yeah, I was just ready to do something else.
awesome. That's so cool. So tell us a little bit about Sacred Portion.
Yeah, Sacred Portion is one of two private adoption agencies in Montana. So we specialize in international and domestic adoption. Our main international program is with the Philippines, but we also work with families in Montana to do all of their pre-placement evaluations, as well as all of their post-adoption and post-placement reporting that's required for that country. And then domestically, we do the same thing, all the pre-placement evaluation, post-placement reporting, as well as work with birth mothers to do any necessary relinquishment counseling or making an adoption plan. And then part of that, I also work with different women's clinics and pregnancy clinics around Montana, just to help educate them on adoption as an option, just the legality of it, the different experiences that we work with, and other stories, just so that they are informed on educating women on that if they want that option. And yeah, we're a ministry-based organization located in Bozeman.
Wow, that's amazing. So you guys function domestically, like in the state of Montana, and then also you work with, you said the Philippines. And so is that like bringing kids from the Philippines into families in Montana?
Yeah, so that's our main placement program. So we can place children from the Philippines into families anywhere in the US. Everybody needs either a placement agency that also works as their home study agency, or they can be one or the other. So you have to have somebody in your state that supervises the adoption, and then a placement agency is just somebody who has the program or the country of origin of the child that you would like to adopt. So we specifically do the Philippines. Other agencies have India or Haiti. But a lot of families, or all the families in Montana, would use an agency here to supervise that adoption, and vice versa. So we have a lot of families all over the US that have placed with the Philippines, but also have an agency in their state to supervise.
Okay, all right, that makes sense. That's so cool. Good. So you're not just placing them in families in Montana, then you're also placing them around the US.
All over the country work with families. So it's
Okay.
kind of part of adoption you have to get to know, and it's something that families learn along the way, is the different types of agencies. And
Yeah.
it's it's domestic as well. So we'll kind of talk about the current adoption landscape in Montana,
Mhm.
but you can even use a placing agency in a different state while we supervise your adoption in Montana. So yeah, it's kind of a good tidbit to know, something to research
Yeah.
jumping into adoption.
Yeah, that makes sense. That's what I was so excited that you wanted to come on the podcast because I feel like adoption is something that we hear about and it's like, yeah, that's a good thing and we want it. But I have some friends that have adopted and I know very little about their process. But what I think the like stigma is like adoption is hard and it's confusing and it's very legal. And so I'm glad that we're just gonna debunk some of the stuff and share some information about it.
Yeah, it's good to talk about. I mean, even when I started in adoption, I feel like I knew such a small tidbit of what the whole world actually looks like. And I feel a lot of our families have that same impression. Even when they start, they kind of jump in blind to it. So it's great to have another platform to educate people about what that process actually looks like.
Good, awesome. So let's dive into that. What does choosing adoption look like for an expectant mom?
For an expectant mom, it's really changed over the last 30 years, I would say, which is what makes adoption so great now and such a great option for women now. There's a lot of choice involved, a lot of possibilities involved as an expectant mom, which I think is great. Everything from, I always tell moms to begin with, asking about adoption isn't making an adoption plan. I
Mm-hmm.
think that's a really great piece to know. The best decision you can make is an informed and consensual one. So we really want to make sure that women are getting the best information possible in order to make that decision to make an adoption plan. And along the road, it looks a lot like these kinds of conversations we're having, just talking about where they're at, why they want to adopt, what the vision they have for their child is. And it also looks like looking at family profiles, letting them look through and see if any of those families are what they would want for their child. And if not, we can work with agencies in different states to try to find a family that better fits that vision. And then relinquishment counseling is another really big part of making an adoption plan
Mm-hmm.
for expectant mothers. It's a little bit different in every state. In Montana, there's a required 3 hours of relinquishment counseling with a social worker, and we talk through all sorts of things. We talk about the possibility of parenting and those resources available. We talk about the grief associated with placing a child. We talk about the resources available for them after. We talk about the level of communication they would like to have with the adoptive family and child after the birth plan, everything. So we try to go over as much as that's possible in at least 3 hours. Sometimes it's more. And only after that can a woman relinquish her rights. And there are other rights involved as well in Montana, especially. Women can't relinquish their rights until at least 72 hours after birth and when they're of mind and body. So that's another really great thing to know. And that kind of goes back to the best decision is an informed and consensual one.
Yeah.
Uh, the social worker feels like you're not in a place to make that decision, or if you're still on medication from giving birth, it won't be to relinquish.
Okay. That makes sense. So they're required to go through counseling and they talk about the emotions of it, the process of it. And so that can happen anytime in the pregnancy.
Yep, anytime in the pregnancy, we've gotten calls as, as far as a woman is in the hospital giving birth and decide to make an adoption plan to
Okay.
as early as she just found out. Relinquishment counseling, depending on how quickly they'd like the placement to happen, can happen in one sitting. It can happen in multiple sittings, just depending on what the situation is. So that's another great part of kind of how adoption has changed. It's become pretty um, flexible, but still very within the boundaries of the birth mother's needs, which is great.
That makes sense. Yeah. So it sounds like it's really focused, like if that's the situation, it's really focused on the birth mother and making sure that she's sure that she wants to give up the baby and probably repeating multiple times that thing that you said in the beginning of talking about adoption isn't, deciding to do adoption or however you said that. Um, yeah, so that makes sense. And so the 72 hours after, so she's with the baby for like 3 days and so if she had decided to adopt before then, can she then change her mind and choose to keep the baby in that time frame?
So that's what we call domestic adoption risk. It's something that all of our families who have chosen the path of domestic adoption have to sign contracts towards, understanding that any investment they have in that pregnancy or birth mother that could be dissolved, that the birth mother could choose parent, and not go through with the adoption plan that she seemingly may have created. It's something to know about domestic adoption, but that also goes towards all options are difficult. There are difficulties in every option on both sides, adoptive families and for birth mothers. So if she makes that decision to parent, then we have to accept that that is the best thing for that child, to be with her or his birth parent, and try to help them as much as possible.
Yeah, yeah, that makes sense. And so on the side of like an adopting family, is there counsel that happens on that side too?
Yeah, for sure. So before, during, and after, whether it happens or not. So the pre-placement evaluation, or we call it the home study, is when we do a lot of training and preparation for the adoption journey. During the talks with the birth mother, during the pregnancy, there's a lot of one-on-one time with a social worker, just going through those emotions and preparations. And then after, if an adoption does occur, then it looks like post-placement reporting, coming in, supervising the house, seeing how things are going, making sure the new family is getting the support they need. And if the adoption didn't go through, then the same thing. I've reached out to a lot of families who maybe the adoption didn't go through, just try to be there for them as much as possible. And it is a huge grief. You can't underestimate the amount of grief that goes into it, but a lot of them stay steadfast in their conviction to adopt, which is beautiful.
Wow. Yeah, that would be really hard to have that back and forth journey as an adopting family. So,
Absolutely. It's something that a lot of our adoptive families are going through in the current landscape as well. Because surprisingly, a lot of waiting families right now hoping for an infant adoption.
wow.
Pretty beautiful, but also a really difficult journey that they're on right now, waiting.
Yeah. And is that like local to Montana or across the nation? There's a lot of families waiting.
Actually, surprisingly, pretty nationwide. I've
Yeah.
seen a couple of different statistics, everywhere from 40 waiting families to every infant placed to 70 waiting families for every infant placed right now.
Wow.
Um, right now, for our agency, we've recommended for all of our domestic families here in Montana to find a placing agency in another state, more so in a bigger metropolis or city, because there's a higher likelihood that a woman may want to place, just because we're not really having a lot of women in Montana right now who want to place their children,
Okay.
for many different factors, but it's just kind of the current landscape for our infant adoption right now.
Gotcha. Okay. So there's like plenty of families in Montana that want an infant, but not as many birth moms that are choosing adoption.
Yeah, and I think that's kind of the confusion between foster care and adoption.
Yeah.
A lot you hear a lot that there aren't enough families, there aren't enough families, and that is definitely true in foster care. I've had some conversations in Montana about that, but adoption wise, especially infant adoption specifically, there are a lot of waiting families, which is why kind of the call right now is, to look towards older children. Maybe more families could be looking towards adopting an older child, because there actually are quite a few older children available in Montana to adopt
Okay.
domestically. Yeah.
And that was going to be one of my next questions is, yeah, do families seek to adopt older children or is it not very common?
It depends. We see it a lot in our international program, especially the Philippines is a great example that we work with. All of those children for international adoption are older children, sibling groups, or children with medical disabilities. And that's just kind of the state of international typically, because they will try to adopt those children domestically first. So anybody available for international adoption is somebody that maybe they can't get adopted domestically. So usually our international families kind of have that mindset more so than our domestic families. But there actually are quite a few children domestically who are available for adoption. They just aren't always the demographic that domestic families are looking for.
Gotcha. That makes sense. Gosh, I think that would be such a hard part of the adoption world is having to talk about kids like this one's
Yeah.
wanted, this one's not. Like it's like there's a market for like an age range. Like how do you deal with that?
It is hard, and I would say it actually is really hard for adoptive families as well. And what I always tell them is we don't just need a parent for this child, we need the right parent for this child.
Mm.
Who live in Montana and you're not near a big city and can't get medical resources readily, it would be really hard for you to adopt a child with medical disabilities and give them the care that they need. So it's understandable that families should consider the vision for their family and what they can reasonably provide for a child.
Mm-hmm.
It's a really difficult conversation to have. I have a lot of families want to stretch themselves just a little bit further
Yeah.
in order to help more kids, but it's just not the reality of parenting. And I think anybody who has parented would know it's hard already. And to add maybe factors that you're not prepared for or can't provide help for is really putting yourself and a child in a bad situation.
Yeah, that makes sense. I love that approach. It's like, yes, we have to talk about it in those terms, but really the goal of the agency, it sounds like to me, is to do what's best for that child and for that family. There's no like preference of one or the other. It's like we want what's best for everyone involved.
Exactly. We really want successful families, right? We want this situation to be successful. We want to create a happy family. Uh, it's just the realities of things that we have to look out for and prepare families for, of the realities of parenting.
Yeah. So does that mean that there's like some criteria that families have to meet to match with certain kids?
It depends on the program that they're adopting from. So, domestically, there's not necessarily set criteria other than what a birth mother would want for her child, versus the Philippines has specific requirements of who can adopt. They have married couples that have to have been married for X amount of time, um, etc. So some countries you can only be of certain religions. So it's another thing to look at when researching adoption and different programs of if you meet the criteria of the program that you're looking to adopt from.
Okay, that makes sense. And so that would be like, does Sacred Portion have criteria if that's the agency they're using? Is that how that works?
Yes, we have specific criteria for who we accept as clients, but the
Okay.
criteria also comes from the programs that we are running. So, if you wanted to adopt from the Philippines and we see that you don't meet that requirement, it would be hard for us to take you on as a client, knowing that they would never let you adopt. So, our website has that information of all of our specific criteria.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, it's pretty straightforward, usually just things that are best for children and families, such as being married for a certain amount of time. I don't know if newlyweds are always in the best position to go through the adoption journey. That's a hard time to do it. So things like that.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense. And so, domestically, if there's a birth mom considering giving up her baby, it sounds like she kind of gets to pick who she wants, so the adopting family doesn't have as much say in like this type of baby. If they want a domestic infant, it's a lot more about if you get chosen by the birth mom.
Yes and no. So the home study, which is that pre-placement evaluation, we kind of talk about the family's requirements for a child. So, for example, in the home study, it would be listed that a family is looking for a child 0 to 2, specific race. They could say any race or ethnicity, boy or girl, and these kinds of medical disabilities we would accept.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, so if a birth mother then came to us and said, I want this type of family, we would never show her profiles where her child isn't included in a family's type of child that they would accept.
Okay.
So that's where our intervention only comes in, is
Mm-hmm.
showing her profiles that wouldn't match with that,
Sure.
and vice versa. So that's our intervention in that process.
Yeah. Okay, that makes sense. There's like both sides get to have some type of say.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
So and
Okay.
something we talk a lot about during the home study is the type of child that families could parent the best. So going through
Yeah.
those medical disabilities, going through ages, how does that work in your family? What is your vision for your family and your motivation to adopt? So
Mm.
that's what a worker would walk a family through.
Yeah, yeah, that makes sense. And I suppose like whether a family has other kids or not is probably a factor in all of that too.
For sure. There are some countries, India is a good example, that you actually can't adopt out of birth order. So it would at least 6 months younger, I believe, than your youngest child. Philippines, you can adopt out of birth order. Domestically, you can. So that's an important point. And then if you maybe had a newer child, maybe it's not your time to adopt, something that we could talk about. Just all of those considerations definitely go into it.
Wow, that's so interesting. Yeah. And so I don't know if this is even a question that's able to be answered, but as far as like kids in Montana that need adoption, is there any way to know like a rough number or like an age range of like, yes, there's older kids and yes, there's younger kids, or there's a big need or small need, like specifically to our state?
Yeah, I think CPS would have more of a specific number for you. I've had some conversations with them about the type of children,
Yeah.
and it's because US really does value reunification that we end up
Mm,
having by the time they're actually available for adoption are older or sibling groups or medical disabilities. You really couldn't read that situation. Is the types of children that are available for adoption here in Montana mostly.
okay.
And if there were to be a birth mother who wanted to make an adoption plan, that would be that child. It's just not happening frequently right now.
Yeah, yeah, that makes sense. Which, like you said, in a way, that's kind of a good thing if moms are trying to parent, and reunification, I know, can be really healthy if it's done well. So, yeah,
Yeah,
good.
definitely. It's one of the things that there's definitely multiple factors to why that might be happening. And we can just take this time to continue and developing our program and our resources so that when a birth mother does need to place a child, that we're ready for it.
Yeah, yeah, that makes sense. That's great. So, let's talk about open adoption specifically. What would you want families or people listening to know about open adoption?
Yeah, I think open adoption can be really intimidating for families. I think one of the myths associated with that is, will my child love their birth family more than me? That can kind of be one that I hear sometimes. Or the other myth you hear a lot is sort of a certain vision or stereotype of who the birth family is and not wanting their child to associate with that. And I would say both are not true. That's rarely the situation that we see. And I would want birth families to really, or adoptive families, to really consider that option and if they're open to it, because it does really help create this story of adoption for their child.
Mm.
If you think about any other topic, if we don't talk about something, if we don't address it, it kind of becomes taboo and secretive. Rather than really being able to discuss it out in the open and create this beautiful story. And I think an open adoption can really help with that. Not that you can't do it with a semi open or closed adoption, but knowing where we came from is really important to us. And giving children that opportunity, especially if it is a positive relationship and you can create a really positive situation surrounding open adoption, it can be really beautiful.
Yeah.
Uh, One of my favorite resources is Brave Love. They do a great job of posting birth mothers' stories who decided to place children for adoption. And they talk about that, talk about open versus semi open versus closed. And I
Okay.
would really recommend people go on and listen to some of those stories of how some of those open adoptions really played out and how beautiful it was.
Yeah. And that was a book you said?
That one is a website. Yeah,
Oh,
Brave,
okay.
and it's great.
Awesome. Okay. Brave Love, you said. Awesome. Yeah, that's a great resource. So with the open, I guess who decides if it's open, semi closed, or closed?
That's another one where we got to get a matchup going. So
Okay.
something to talk about during the home study is families' openness to those different options and how they're feeling about it. And then it would be a big decision for the birth mother as well. Those types of communication can change. And I think that's another thing, like the domestic adoption risk, that's really important to know. These communication agreements are agreements of integrity. Because the mother is relinquishing her rights, there's no way to enforce a communication agreement,
Mm,
which is why it's really important to take your time choosing an adoptive family, maybe get to know them, and also our responsibility as social workers to really take our time during the home study, getting to know the characters of these families. Of course, that could change for many reasons. If it's not a positive situation, the family feels the need to close off communication. That's their prerogative. But overall, yeah, it is something that we kind of need them to match up on and have.
mm.
We have them sign an agreement. It's not enforceable, but it's kind of a, if you sign it, it feels real. If it's on paper, maybe it feels like something that you can follow through to.
Okay, so it's not something that's as legal as like a custody agreement. It's
No,
just
not
a integrity. We agree to keep it open, and so then the family would have rights to close that off if they wanted to. So the birth mom has to trust that. And then if it was, so that means if it was a closed adoption, and say the mom, or maybe the kid wanted to know who their mom was, they could potentially reopen that if the mom was open to it later on in the kid's life.
theoretically. So if a birth mom chooses to have a closed adoption, then her records will be protected until the child turns 8. So a family couldn't randomly decide to reach out to her without her knowledge. So it kind of works down, but not up
Okay.
communication, because the birth mother has rights as well after placement.
Yeah. I mean, and I'm sure some birth moms, maybe even it's just because it's too painful or too hard, they probably don't want communication. And that's, I mean, that's has to be okay.
Definitely. There's this huge element of grief, and we call it ambivalent loss. It's where, you don't have something, but you know it's out there.
Mm,
One of the reasons there are some birth moms that specifically want to place outside of their state, because otherwise you're looking around everywhere for your child, saying, "Is that my child? Is that my child?" And
wow.
it's really painful for a lot of birth mothers and birth families overall. And it's something that I would encourage people to be very cognizant of the
Yeah.
difficulty of that decision, and the grief and emotional journey that happens after placement for women is very real.
Yeah. So just having compassion for that, for those who do give up adoption.
Yeah, absolutely. And that kind of goes back to what I was saying earlier of like no option is easy. Um,
Mm,
their own difficulties. I think it's really easy sometimes to say, like, well, this is the obvious choice.
yeah.
Why do that? But there is a lot of pain and grief involved in all options, even parenting. And I think having that compassion for people who are going through an unexpected pregnancy is really important in how we approach it as communities.
Yeah, yeah, I think that's so great to be aware of. It's not easy to decide that. Yeah, and so that makes sense. So if there was a family that was listening that was a potential adoptive family, what advice would you give them? What's the process for them to get started?
Yeah, I would say step one is really considering the vision for your family. Like I was saying earlier, it's hard to go outside of that vision and stretch yourself thin to make something happen that you're not actually convicted to do.
Mm,
Um, it really is a calling. It's a conviction. You have to be very sure because it's a hard journey. And I would really encourage people to really pray about it, think about that vision, decide what's best for their family because it is a life altering decision. Before and after adoption, your family won't look the same, obviously.
yeah.
So that's step one, absolutely. And part of that vision is researching the program that you want to adopt from. So if you're looking at older children, you could look within foster care, children who are available for adoption. You could look internationally. If you're looking for a younger child, there are some international programs that do some younger adoptions. I've seen India has done quite a few younger children. They may have some medical disabilities, but it can be to varying degrees. And then domestic infant adoption is another very popular one. And then doing research on a placement agency and a home study slash supervising agency in your state. They can be the same thing if they have your program and they're in your state. Otherwise, you'll have to find multiple agencies. And step one is starting the home study. So that looks like a couple of visits with a social worker, talking about your background, talking about your motivation to adopt, and then going through some other information like your finances, your background checks, things like that, that all get written up into a report and sent to the program you're looking to adopt from.
Wow. So be prepared for it to be intrusive.
Yes, for sure.
Yeah.
I always tell families that I'm like, I know this is going to feel intrusive. It really is for the best. It's hard to think that way, to think like, wow, to help a child, this is a lot of work. But it is the best because the home study is also a really great opportunity to work with social workers to prepare your.
Mm,
It's a lot of training based and letting them see what areas we may need to work on to strengthen your marriage or your parenting skills for children with hard backgrounds, and really make the situation successful. It's more than just an evaluation, is what I always tell my family, is I want to work with you to
Yeah.
make this a positive.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I think, yeah, I think it's easy to let the stigma of like, it's so complicated to adopt and it's so hard, and another myth of like, it's so expensive and all of those things to like stop us from doing it. But I love what you explained of like working with the family and the social worker for everyone's benefit. I've been part of, I haven't adopted, but I was a nanny for a family who has actually adopted 3 children. And there was a ton of ups and downs, but that mom specifically, her background was in like trauma kids and social work and teaching. And so like she knew how to handle the birth family. She knew how to handle their emotions and her own emotions. And like it was a really like good learning experience. But most of us don't have that background of like you're dealing with something totally different than just like you can love them all you want, but they're going to have different insecurities than your birth children and different questions. And especially if they come with any, medical issues or anything like that. So I think that's a cool way to look at it of like, it's worth it to let it feel intrusive, but the social worker is not trying to ruin your life. They're trying to help you do your family.
Yeah, definitely. And I think kind of the two pieces you really hit on is it is difficult. It is intrusive, which is why I said it really needs to be a conviction. Like you have to have passion for knowing this is the right thing for your family, and it makes all of that a lot more approachable. Um, and I also think that a huge resource is meeting and talking to other adopted families, because you naturally have that background and skills. And learning from other adoptive families that these struggles are normal, that all of this doesn't come naturally necessarily. Birth parent relationships, going through the home study, the waiting period, the difficulties your child is having because they're from a difficult background. All that is really, really difficult to take on. And creating a community of adoptive parents that they can find each other and share in those struggles together is really important. I think something I'd like to say that we've done pretty well at Sacred Portion is one of the first tools I offer families when they're going through a hard time. Do you want to talk to another adoptive family? Because they'll know what you're going through a lot better than I do. Even our executive director, she's also adoptive parent, domestic and international children. And I am always like, do you want to talk to her? She's a great
Yeah.
for you. And I think that's a really important point to push on too.
That's good. And it's nice to hear that it's like the agency that you work with, like if it was Sacred Portion, they're not just like, here's this kid, good luck. It's like an ongoing relationship to help you with the struggles that come up.
Yeah, exactly. And that's another piece of advice I would give adoptive parents, especially. It is really hard to ask for help, but this is one of those situations where it can only help. There
Yeah.
isn't judgment, there isn't a risk of things not happening. We want to make this successful. And that can be really hard to admit that you need it, that things aren't working. We might need extra help or input. I think that's a really difficult phase of the transition that adoptive families go through. So that's another thing to say to people who are thinking about adopting is having that mindset of knowing when to ask for help is a really big tool to have in your pocket.
Yeah. I think that's really good. That's just good advice for all parents.
Truly. Honestly, it's advice I could take.
Yeah, exactly. It's hard to ask for help for anything. So that's good to know that there's resources and support out there for adoptive families though. Um, Yeah, that's really good. So if there was a family in Montana that was considering adoption, they wouldn't necessarily, like they'd want to research Sacred Portion to see if you guys had the program that they were looking for. It's not like every agency can help every family. Is that what I'm understanding?
Right. So
Okay.
even um, if they chose a program we didn't have, we could still serve as maybe the agency that does their home study, their pre-placement evaluation, and we could also work with another agency that they choose to do their reporting
Yeah.
after adoption, because that has to be in person. But if there was somewhere that they wanted to adopt from and we didn't have that program, they would find a different placing agency, which could be anywhere in the US. They would just need to use a Montana adoption agency for all of that in-person reporting that's required.
Okay, that makes sense. So it might be like a combination of a couple different agencies depending on where they're wanting to adopt from.
Definitely, which is very common. It's very common for agencies to work together, placement and supervising, to complete an adoption and make it successful.
Yeah. Well, that's good. It's good that there's so much cohesiveness going on between adoption agencies around the world and across the nation. And
I think everybody wants successful, happy families that works in adoption. So it's easy to reach across and figure out what needs to be done.
yeah, that's amazing. That's so good to hear for, yeah, adoptive families. So now for the $1,000,000 question. What do you wish pro-life advocates knew more about concerning adoption?
I think there's a couple of different pieces. I think one we've kind of hit on a couple of times is just how difficult that decision is.
Mm.
In a place as an expectant parent where you realize you can't parent, has to be pretty difficult. That situation has to be hard. And I think that women in that situation, we have to maybe consider why they're drawn away from Christian communities instead of drawn towards them.
Mm.
And of advice I would really give pro-lifers is that people don't just remember what you say to them, they remember how you make them feel. I
Mm.
think the important piece, especially thinking about what we were just saying about asking for help, right? How difficult that can be.
Yeah.
Think about an environment where you feel safe and comfortable asking for help. What creates that environment? How do you replicate
Mm.
your own life and community, in order to reach more people and allow them to get that help from you? And I would just say pro-life isn't just valuing life, but valuing people as well and valuing their experiences and thinking about the environment that would make it, again, easy and comfortable to reach out for help is really important.
Yeah, I think that's beautiful. Just really focusing on the compassion to the woman going through the unplanned pregnancy, because I think that's something that we're starting to do a little better in the pro-life movement. But I think for a lot of decades past, probably before my time and your time, it wasn't focused. The woman was almost the enemy, and
Right.
that's just not true. And so I love that, yeah, just that advice of, show them Christ, show them compassion, show them love. And because I think it's like 70 or 80% of women considering abortion, they would, if they felt they had the support they needed to parent, they wouldn't choose the abortion. And
Right.
so same thing with, like, if you want that mom to choose adoption instead, like, they need to feel that support and that compassion. So I love that that was the advice that you had for us as pro-life advocates. That's really good.
Yeah, definitely. And that just hits the point exactly of what I was saying of thinking about where you are mentally when you realize you can't get this child, and how truly difficult that situation is. The National Council for Adoption released a great study that used focus groups, all about birth mother experiences. And the quote from one of the birth mothers is along the lines of, "This really is a decision of love. And one of the
Mm-hmm.
hardest of love you'll ever make because you realize your love isn't enough for this child, and that's more." And if you really let that sink in, how heartbreaking that is, but how selfless it is to choose that, to still go through a pregnancy, to still know your child is out there and choose something for them that you can't give them, is what I would really encourage people to reflect more on rather than the how they got there. I think
Mm.
be focused on the situation the mother is in, the decisions she made to get there, instead of, the heart it takes in that moment to make a decision for life.
Yeah. Wow. That's so beautiful. I love that. And it reminded me that I actually worked with a gal, a young gal, similar age to me, and she was married when I met her, but she had given up her first child for adoption before she had gotten married. And I just remember it was just starting to be an open adoption for them. So, like, she hadn't known him and he was like 5 or something, and they were like, she was starting to get pictures of him and some other things. And it was just so beautiful to hear her talk about her decision to adopt, because it's like she missed her son, she loved him, but she knew that she knew, like, in that moment 5 years ago, it was the choice of love. Like, if she was where she was at when I knew her, she would have just kept him. And so even just later on, just seeing her walk through, not necessarily regret, but just the grief still of, like, I know it was the right choice, but it's always going to be difficult on some level.
Right, definitely. And
Yeah.
I true grief is such a big part of it, and I think that's part of making an informed decision. But it's part of all the options in different ways. There's a lot of forms of grief. But yeah, I think that selfless decision for love is like a really big story that doesn't always get told. I think there is a lot of stereotypes that are easy to put on the type of woman a birth mom is. Of the reality that there's all different types of women in so many different situations that want to make a choice for love or a choice that's just difficult and know they can't parent. And I think those need more focus than the stereotypical ones we hear a lot.
Yeah, I think that's really good advice. And I would just add, as far as like advice to pro-life advocates, like we're told from, people that are not pro-life advocates, like if you were really for life, then you would adopt yourself. Like you would all adopt a child. And I think we can still, like, that sounds so righteous, and we can like buy into that of like, oh yeah, if I'm going to be against abortion, then I can only speak out on that if I have at least one adopted child for myself. And I feel like you've really made the point that that's not the case. Like you want, like we want life is what we want. And just because there's families who aren't ready themselves to adopt, that would be bad for the child too. Like we don't want people, just everybody taking on a child just to satisfy someone else's accusation of us. And so I think I would give that advice to pro-life advocates of like, that is a lie, and that is an accusation to try and trap you to not speak out about abortion, but you don't have to necessarily be convicted yourself to adopt to, advocate against abortion.
It's really easy to fall into those absolutes. A book that touches on this very, very well is called Help Her Be Brave. It's by Amy Ford. And she kind of talks about the Christians in the pro-life movement and finding your spot in the pro-life movement. And she really touches great on that. We all have strengths as Christians that lead us to a specific calling. Mm-hmm. And we use our strengths for movements like this. One of the examples she gives is, even if you're a mechanic, what if you did like a raffle for 15% off your next oil change if you donate to the women's clinic in your city? Something like that. Or there's so many other options, like providing respite care. Maybe you're an empty nester, you're not ready to take on parenting another child, but you could watch them for a day and let an adoptive couple go on a date and have themselves. So I would really encourage pro-lifers to stay away from that absolute. Because of what we touched on earlier, it takes the right parent, not any parent, but to lean into your strengths and find your spot in the pro-life movement. And again, I would highly recommend reading that book by Amy Ford. It's great.
That's amazing. I want to read that book. It was Help Her Be Brave by Amy Ford.
Help Her Be Brave.
Awesome. I'll try and link to it in the show notes. That sounds like a really good read.
It is. It's great for anybody who's considering just kind of their spot in the pro-life movement and domestic adoption more. It's great.
Okay. Excellent. Yeah, that's great. So final thoughts. What do you want our listeners to know about Sacred Portion or adoption in general? How do they find you? Any of that?
Yeah. So Sacred Portion, you can call, email us. All of our information is on our website, sacredportion.org. We're one of 2 private adoption agencies in Montana. The other is Catholic Social Services. I'll give them a shout out because they're also great. And I just want them to know, in general, domestic adoption in general, it is a difficult option, but it also is an option of opportunity. There are possibilities with adoption. It's the choice of life. And it can be a really beautiful journey for as many difficulties as there is. Just a general shout out to my team in general. We've worked very and care deeply for all of our clients. I think we do a really great job at just answering questions about adoption as well. Like we talked about earlier, it's hard to know sometimes even what to ask about adoption because most of the time it's such an unknown world for people. And so I would really encourage you to ask questions and get to know it more and find your place kind of in the community of how you can help women and families.
I love it. That's so good. Because like you said, everyone has a place, and we can find that. Doesn't have to mean you're the one adopting. It can mean, I love that idea of watching the child and the adoptive family can go on a date. Like that's a beautiful option.
You can make small changes and make positive impacts.
Yeah, I love it. So it was sacredportion.org, correct?
Yep.
Awesome. Awesome. So, listeners, if you want to learn more about adoption, visit sacredportion.org. Check out Catholic Social Services. We'll link to them in the show notes. If they even just have questions about it, can they reach out to Sacred Portion, Brinn?
Yeah, absolutely. There's an info at email on our website, or you're more than welcome to reach out to myself as the social worker as well. It's just Brinn, Brinn, at sacredportion.org. I'm happy to answer any questions as well.
Perfect. Yeah, that's excellent. So if you have questions about this, feel free to reach out to Brinn. You can also email abortignorancemt@gmail.com if you have any thoughts, questions, stories to share. And just start asking questions about adoption. And hopefully this helped everyone understand that you don't have to adopt to fulfill, that pro-life mandate that other people put on us, but there are options in Montana and abroad for this beautiful way of having a family. So visit sacredportion.org. And as always, subscribe to our show, like and download so you can listen anywhere on the go and be notified of future episodes coming out. And email us at abortignorancemt@gmail.com with any questions. Until next time, guys, thanks for listening.